I never imagined I would be the one asking my husband for something like this. After 12 years of marriage, 3 children, and too many nights sharing the same roof but not the same heart, I reached a point where the silence between us weighed more than any argument ever could. That night felt like all the others. The kids were asleep, the house was quiet, and Marcus sat on the couch glowing in the blue light of his phone while I folded laundry in front of him. 2 people in the same room, living in completely different worlds. We didn't fight or yell anymore. We had simply stopped feeling each other's presence. Watching him, I tried to remember the last time we had a real conversation, the kind that makes you lose track of time, like when we were younger and talked until sunrise. I couldn't remember. And that realization cut deeper than I expected, because long marriages don't usually break in one dramatic moment. They slowly wear down in silence until one day you wake up and realize the person beside you no longer knows what's inside your heart. Weeks earlier, a friend had told me about something unusual. An exercise with 36 questions designed to create intimacy between 2 people. The questions start simple, but each one opens a deeper, more vulnerable door. For days I thought about asking Marcus to try it with me, but fear kept stopping me. Fear that he would laugh, that he would think it was ridiculous, or worse, that we would discover there was nothing left between us to save. But that night something inside me finally broke. My hands trembled as I set the shirt down and whispered his name. When he looked up, I asked him to try something strange with me and promised he could say no after hearing me out. To my surprise, he didn't laugh. He listened quietly and then asked, almost softly, "Is that how you feel, like we're losing each other?" Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I admitted that I felt like I was losing him. After a long silence, he placed his phone aside, patted the space next to him on the couch and said, "Come here, let's try." That night we began with the simplest questions. Whether we would want to be famous, what a perfect day would look like. But even those revealed things I didn't know about the man I had lived with for 12 years. Marcus confessed that his perfect day was a quiet cabin in the mountains with just the 2 of us. No phones, no responsibilities, only time and silence. Night after night, the questions grew deeper and more personal. One evening he admitted something he had hidden for 3 years. A major promotion he had turned down, not for the family as I had always believed, but because he was afraid of failing. Since then he had quietly wondered what his life might have been if he had been brave enough to say yes, and part of that regret had turned into resentment he never meant to feel toward me. Hearing it shocked me, yet instead of pushing us apart it brought us closer, because for the first time in years we were seeing each other without the masks we had been wearing. The most powerful moment came when we reached the final question. Share something you have never told your partner because you were afraid of their reaction. After Marcus confessed one of his old secrets, I gathered the courage to share mine. The darkness I felt after our second child was born, and the afternoon I sat alone in the car in the garage with the engine running, trying to understand why I felt so empty. When I finished, Marcus looked pale, his eyes full of tears. He whispered my name and pulled me into a deep embrace, holding me as if he were afraid to let go. We stayed like that for a long time, breathing together, rediscovering a closeness we had forgotten existed. In the weeks that followed, something quietly changed between us. We began listening again, speaking honestly again, even creating our own questions long after the 36 were finished. Our marriage didn't become perfect, but beneath the everyday arguments something real returned. On our 13th anniversary we finally visited that quiet cabin in the mountains Marcus once described. Standing under the stars with his arms wrapped around my waist, his breath warm near my neck, I realized something I will never forget. Love doesn't always disappear. Sometimes it simply waits for the courage to truly see each other again. That night in the cabin, I understood something I had never truly understood during all those years of marriage. Love is not something that disappears suddenly. It doesn't vanish from one day to the next like a light being switched off. Instead, it hides. It gets buried under routine, exhaustion, and the endless responsibilities life places on our shoulders until we barely remember how to breathe. Marcus stood behind me with his arms wrapped around my waist as we looked up at the dark sky filled with stars, his chest rising slowly against my back, and for the first time in a long while I felt our bodies breathing in the same rhythm. It wasn't just physical closeness, it was something deeper, something we had forgotten how to feel. His arms tightened slightly around me and he whispered near my ear, asking what I was thinking about. I smiled without realizing it and said I was thinking about us. He gently rested his forehead against my head and admitted he was thinking about us too. We stayed there in silence for a moment, listening to the wind moving through the trees and the faint sound of a nearby lake touching the shore, and that silence felt different from the heavy quiet that once filled our house. It was calm, present, alive. Marcus finally said that he thought we had lost each other for a while, and I nodded, telling him that maybe we had, but somehow we had found our way back again. He laughed softly and said he never imagined a set of strange questions could lead us here, but I told him those questions weren't silly. They were brave because they forced us to say the things we usually hide. He thought about it and admitted that maybe our biggest mistake was that we stopped saying what we truly felt, remembering how we both retreated into our own worlds night after night. Him into his phone, me into my thoughts. I told him we had become experts at pretending everything was fine, and he replied that the worst part was that we did it out of love, because he believed protecting me meant hiding his fears, while I believed being strong meant hiding my sadness. The irony, he said, was that in trying to protect each other we almost lost everything. A cold wind passed through and he noticed I was shivering, guiding me inside the cabin where the fireplace still glowed softly, lighting the room with a warm, trembling glow. He placed a blanket around my shoulders and we sat together in front of the fire, the quiet between us comfortable now. I admitted my biggest fear had been that one day we would wake up as strangers, but he shook his head and took my hand, saying that maybe we stopped looking at each other but we never stopped caring. Then he told me he still had one question he had never asked me, not one of the 36 but his own, and with a nervous smile he asked if I could go back to the moment we first met, knowing everything we would go through, would I still choose him? I didn't hesitate, said yes, even knowing how hard it would be. Especially because of that. Because after everything, we were still here. He looked at me in the firelight and said he would choose me again too. And for the first time in years those words felt like a decision in the present rather than a memory from the past. We talked for hours that night, remembering our first trip together, the first time we said, "I love you," the sleepless nights after our children were born, and even our worst arguments, laughing at some of them as if they belonged to another lifetime. It felt like opening an old book filled with forgotten chapters of our lives. At some point near dawn Marcus leaned back against the couch and smiled tiredly, saying that maybe this was his perfect day. Simply being there with me and talking honestly. I told him the best part was that we no longer needed 36 questions anymore. All we needed was to keep asking each other things and keep listening. He leaned forward and kissed my forehead gently, asking me to promise that we would never again let silence grow between us out of fear. Promise. The fire slowly faded as the sky outside began to lighten with the first colors of morning, and as Marcus held my hand again he said it felt like we were truly starting over for the first time in years. In that moment I understood something even deeper than everything we had discovered before. Love isn't just about finding the right person, it's about having the courage to choose them again and again, even after getting lost along the way. And that morning in that small cabin in the mountains, Marcus and I did exactly that. We chose each other again. That dawn, in that small cabin in the middle of the mountains, Marcus and I chose each other again. But something changed after those words. It wasn't immediate. It was more like a different silence, heavier, more charged. The kind of silence that appears when two people look at each other and know that something deep is about to happen. The fireplace had almost died out, only a few embers glowing faintly in the darkness of the room. The red light of the fire painted soft shadows across the wooden walls. Outside, the wind moved slowly through the trees of the forest, and the sound of the lake touching the shore felt closer now. Marcus was still holding my hand. He didn't let go. His fingers moved slowly over my skin, as if remembering every line of my hand. I looked at him. His eyes were different. It wasn't just tenderness. There was something else. Something more intense. Something I hadn't seen in him for many years. "What's wrong?" I asked softly. Marcus didn't answer right away. He simply watched me for a few long seconds. "I was thinking," he finally said. "About what?" His lips curved into a faint, almost nervous smile. "About how close we came to losing all of this." His words tightened something inside my chest. "I know," I whispered. Marcus lowered his gaze to our intertwined hands. "And the strange thing is we never stopped loving each other," he said slowly. "We just stopped really touching each other." A small shiver ran down my back. It wasn't cold. It was something else. Marcus lifted his eyes again. "Do you remember the last time we were truly alone?" he asked. I thought for a moment but couldn't answer. So many years filled with work, children, responsibilities, and routines had blurred the nights that truly belonged to us. Marcus let out a quiet laugh. "See," he said. "We can't even remember." I leaned back slightly on the couch. "I guess life caught up with us." Marcus shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "We let it catch us." The room fell silent again. But this silence felt different. I could hear his breathing close to mine, slow and steady. His fingers kept tracing my hand calmly, as if rediscovering something he had forgotten. "I always thought love broke because of big fights," I said after a moment. Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And what do you think now?" I looked at the fading fire. "That it wears down through small distances." Marcus nodded slowly. "Yes. Distances that seem small until one day you realize you don't know how to cross them anymore." I looked at him. "But tonight we did." Marcus watched me with an intensity that made me hold my breath. "Tonight we did more than talk," he said. "Oh really?" I asked with curiosity. He leaned slightly closer. We looked at each other again. His face was closer now, the dim firelight barely illuminating his eyes. For a moment neither of us spoke. Then Marcus slowly lifted his hand and brushed a strand of hair away from my face. It was a simple gesture, yet it made my heart beat faster. "I had forgotten how much you love the silence of the mountains," he said softly. "And I had forgotten how much you like watching me when you think I don't notice," I replied. Marcus let out a low laugh. "I was never very subtle with you." "No," I smiled. "You never were." The wind outside grew stronger, the windows trembling slightly. The cabin felt completely cut off from the rest of the world, as if time itself had paused just for us. Marcus rested his arm along the back of the couch, surrounding me without fully touching me. "You know what's funny?" he said quietly. "What?" "After all these years, you still make me nervous." I was surprised. "Really?" He nodded. "Even more than before." Warmth rose through my chest. "That doesn't make sense," I said. Marcus looked straight into my eyes. "Of course it does," he whispered. "Now I know exactly what I could lose." His words lingered between us. The silence returned, but it was no longer peaceful. It was filled with a quiet electricity. I felt his hand slowly move from the back of the couch to my shoulder. Slow, careful, almost as if he were asking permission without speaking. I didn't move. Marcus noticed. His hand slid slightly down my arm. "I had forgotten something important," he said. "What?" His voice dropped even lower. "That love also lives in the small moments, when no one is watching." The distant sound of the lake returned again. Marcus leaned a little closer. I could feel the warmth of his breath. "We're alone here," he whispered. My heart started beating faster. "We were always alone," I replied. "We just didn't know how to find each other." Marcus smiled faintly. "I think now we do." His fingers slowly traced my arm until they found my hand again, but this time the gesture wasn't casual. He held it firmly, intentionally. And in that moment I understood something that made me tremble. This wasn't just reconciliation. It wasn't just nostalgia. It was something more dangerous, more intense. as if something between us that had been asleep for years had finally awakened. And when Marcus leaned even closer and whispered beside my ear, his voice carried a depth that sent a shiver through my whole body. I think tonight is only just beginning.